Imagine an old, sprawling mansion surrounded by silent woods, its grandeur only matched by the quiet loneliness within. This mansion belongs to Leroy Reilly, a man who once had everything by society's standards: unimaginable wealth, influence, a reputation for brilliance. But after decades spent in isolation, cut off from friends and family, his life grew hollow like the empty halls of his estate. Wealth became his only companion, yet it couldn't fill the void within his heart. Our story unfolds one fateful evening when Leroy's quiet life is disrupted by the unexpected arrival of Elsa, a little girl lost in the forest. A small figure, frightened and vulnerable, she finds her way into the depths of his heart, awakening emotions he'd buried long ago. Through Elsa, Leroy begins to see life in a different light, discovering how acts of kindness, empathy, and love can redeem even the most solitary of souls. As we follow this journey, you'll witness how a simple encounter blossoms into a story of compassion, transformation, and second chances. If this story touches you, take a moment to subscribe to our channel and join a community that values stories with heart. And share a thought in the comments below, something like, "Kindness has the power to change lives," to spread inspiration and keep these stories alive. It was late afternoon, and the dense forest behind Leroy Reilly's estate was draped in the deepening shadows of autumn. As the sun sank below the horizon, casting long, eerie fingers of light between the towering pines, a chill settled into the air. Leroy, a man of wealth, experience, and reputation, rarely ventured outside his mansion. It had been years since he felt the need to roam beyond his carefully curated world of solitude. But on this particular day, driven by a restless feeling he couldn't explain, he found himself stepping beyond the gated walls, wandering into the woods with an uncharacteristic sense of curiosity. The forest was silent except for the crunch of leaves beneath his well-polished shoes. Leroy moved slowly, his face hardened with lines of age and solitude, his hands clasped behind his back as he took in the familiar yet distant landscape. He felt the weight of his isolation more acutely here, as if the trees themselves were whispering tales of life that he'd long since left behind. Then, piercing through the silence, a faint sound reached his ears. It was soft and hesitant, almost too quiet to be real, a child sobbing. Leroy froze, his senses sharpening. It had been years since he had heard such a sound, and for a moment, he questioned if it was his mind playing tricks on him. But then he heard it again, a small trembling voice, lost and afraid. His heart, typically stoic and unyielding, gave a slight, unexpected flutter, curiosity mixed with a rare spark of concern, and he turned in the direction of the sound, stepping carefully over the roots and fallen branches. As he pushed through a thicket of bushes, he found her, a small girl, no more than 7 or 8, huddled at the base of a tree. Her clothes were dirty, her hair tangled, and her cheeks streaked with tears. She clutched a worn, threadbare teddy bear to her chest, her wide eyes reflecting both fear and relief as they met his. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other. Leroy, a man whose life had been measured in dollars and decisions, found himself utterly unprepared for the vulnerability and innocence that met his gaze. He was a stranger to softness, to compassion. His life had no place for such things. Yet something about this small, frightened child stirred a long-forgotten part of him. Slowly, he crouched down, his voice rough from disuse. "Are you lost, little one?" The girl nodded, her lip trembling as she tried to hold back fresh tears. I can't find my way back," she whispered, clutching the teddy bear tighter as if it were her last anchor to security. Leroy studied her, feeling a strange mixture of emotions. He was used to calculated decisions, to the cool logic that had brought him wealth and respect. Yet here was a situation that defied all of that, a small child in need, vulnerable and alone. The walls he had so carefully built around himself began to crack, letting in an unfamiliar warmth. Gently, he extended his hand to her. "Come with me," he said softly, surprising even himself with the gentleness in his voice. "You'll be safe at my home. Let's get you warm." The girl hesitated, her gaze flickering between his face and the outstretched hand. Finally, with a small nod, she reached out, placing her tiny, trembling fingers in his. The simplicity of the gesture, her trust, her reliance stirred something deep within him. It was as if in that moment, she had unknowingly extended him a lifeline when he hadn't known he needed. Together, they walked through the forest, her hand gripping his with quiet desperation. As they neared the mansion, its towering silhouette rising against the evening sky, Leroy felt an unexpected sense of purpose, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. He was no longer just a man walking through his estate. He was a protector, a guardian. The feeling unsettled him, but it was also oddly exhilarating. Entering the grand foyer of his mansion, Leroy observed her reaction. Elsa, he would learn her name soon enough, looked around with wide, bewildered eyes, taking in the towering ceilings, the marble floors, and the cold beauty of the space. His mansion was a world of luxury, built to impress and intimidate, but it lacked warmth, lacking the simple comforts of a true home. He felt a sudden pang of discomfort, as if seeing it for the first time through her innocent gaze. "Are you hungry?" he asked, unsure how else to begin. She nodded slowly, still clutching the bear tightly. Leading her into a small dining room, he called for his housekeeper to prepare something simple: soup, bread, perhaps a warm drink. As the fire crackled nearby, filling the room with a gentle warmth, Leroy sat across from her, watching as she ate. Each bite seemed to soothe her, bringing color back to her pale cheeks. As they sat there, an unusual silence filled the room, not the cold, lonely quiet that typically pervaded his home, but a warm, shared silence, one that made him feel oddly content. He watched her, his mind racing with questions. Who was she? Where had she come from? And what was he to do with her? Yet, for all the questions swirling in his mind, he found himself simply enjoying the moment. It was a sensation he hadn't felt in years, a softening, a break in the monotonous solitude of his life. And though he knew very little about this girl, he felt, deep in his soul, that her arrival was no accident. That night, as Elsa slept by the fire, curled up with her teddy bear, Leroy sat nearby, his thoughts drifting back to his own childhood. He remembered a time when he too had been vulnerable, in need of guidance and protection. He thought of the choices he had made to distance himself from others, to bury his heart beneath layers of wealth and solitude. And as he looked at Elsa, he felt something shift within him, a glimmer of the man he might have been, had life unfolded differently. He retired to his own room late that night, yet sleep was elusive. For years, his life had been an unbroken cycle of routine and silence, punctuated only by the occasional business call or brief interaction with his staff. But now, with Elsa in his home, everything felt different. He found himself wondering, for the first time in years, about the world beyond his estate, about the people he had left behind, and about the man he had become. As dawn broke, a new feeling crept into his heart, a tentative hope, a curiosity about what lay ahead. For years, he had believed that his life was complete, that he needed nothing more than the wealth and security he had built around himself. But now, with Elsa sleeping under his roof, he began to see that his life could hold so much more, if only he allowed it. What happens next as Elsa explores Leroy's grand mansion, a world so different from the one she's known? Stay tuned as we continue this journey, discovering the profound impact that kindness and compassion can have on a person's life. As the first light of morning crept through the heavy curtains, Leroy found himself watching Elsa as she explored the grand halls of his mansion. She moved quietly, her small feet making almost no sound on the polished marble floors, her wide, curious eyes taking in every detail around her. The house was vast rooms with towering ceilings, heavy tapestries, grandiose chandeliers, and walls lined with priceless art. But it was also undeniably cold, a space filled with treasures but devoid of warmth. For the first time, Leroy saw his home not as a sanctuary, but as a testament to years spent valuing possessions over people. Elsa's life had been vastly different from his own. That much was clear. She had come from a world where simplicity and necessity ruled, where survival meant using every resource wisely. She was used to finding comfort in small, familiar things: a warm blanket, a well-loved teddy bear, the beauty of a sunset. Now surrounded by opulence, she looked almost overwhelmed, as though struggling to comprehend the sheer extravagance that surrounded her. The contrast was stark, almost jarring, and it struck Leroy deeply. As he watched her, a question gnawed at him. What had all this wealth truly brought him? Years of carefully collecting, investing, and expanding his fortune, of accumulating rare items and fine furnishings, had built this imposing mansion. But in the face of Elsa's innocence and wonder, those possessions felt insignificant, even hollow. Here was a child who had so little, yet somehow she possessed something he had long lost: an openness to the world, an ability to see beauty in simplicity. In an attempt to bridge this strange gap between them, Leroy led Elsa to the mansion's small conservatory. The room was filled with rare, exotic plants he had imported from around the world, a collection intended to impress, but which he rarely visited himself. She gasped softly as they entered, her eyes lighting up as she moved from one vibrant flower to the next, carefully touching each delicate petal. For the first time in years, he found himself truly seeing the room, experiencing it as if through her eyes. What had once been simply another display of wealth now seemed alive, vibrant, meaningful. "You have so many beautiful things," Elsa said quietly, her gaze fixed on a striking orchid. "But do you ever play with them or sit with them?" Her question lingered in the air, and Leroy struggled for an answer. He realized that he had never thought to play with any of it, nor to truly appreciate it. His treasures were simply part of the fortress he had built around himself, items to admire but not to engage with. In her innocent way, Elsa had exposed a painful truth. He had surrounded himself with lifeless things in an attempt to fill a void that they could never satisfy. He cleared his throat, feeling an unexpected weight in his chest. "No, Elsa, I don't play with them," he admitted, his voice softer than usual. "They're just here." Elsa looked up at him, her small face thoughtful. "Maybe you could teach me," she said. "Teach me what all these things mean, why they're special to you." The suggestion startled him, as did the sudden realization that he couldn't remember why he had gathered many of these things in the first place. His life had become a series of acquisitions and transactions, each new item meant to symbolize his success, his ability to achieve. But standing here with Elsa, he found himself questioning the purpose behind it all. Over the next few days, Leroy found himself leading Elsa through different parts of the mansion, watching as she discovered its secrets. In the library, she marveled at the towering shelves lined with leather-bound books, their spines cracked and aged. Leroy had amassed one of the most extensive collections of rare literature, yet he could not recall the last time he had read for pleasure. Elsa's small hands ran over the spines, her eyes filled with wonder. "Do you read them all?" she asked, her voice filled with genuine curiosity. Leroy hesitated, a faint flush of embarrassment coloring his cheeks. Not for a long time," he admitted. "I used to, but life got complicated." In truth, his life had grown lonely, and somewhere along the way, he had stopped engaging with the things that once brought him joy. Elsa, sensing his discomfort, simply nodded, her expression understanding beyond her years. "Maybe one day we can read together," she offered, her small smile breaking through the silence. Her simple suggestion left him speechless. No one had ever offered to sit with him, to share in the quiet joys of life. It was as though she were inviting him into a world he had long forgotten, a world of companionship and shared experiences, a world where wealth was not measured in objects, but in moments spent together. In the days that followed, Elsa continued her exploration, her curiosity boundless. In the gallery, she studied each painting as though it held a secret just for her, pausing before one particular portrait of a young boy, a serious expression on his face, his eyes eerily similar to Leroy's own. She turned to him, sensing a story, and he found himself sharing bits of his childhood, small fragments of his own journey from humble beginnings to the life he now led. He spoke of his drive to escape poverty, to build something that would shield him from the vulnerabilities of his youth. But as he spoke, he felt a strange sense of detachment, as though he were recounting the life of someone else, a version of himself he no longer recognized. Elsa listened intently, her gaze steady and compassionate, and for the first time, Leroy felt that someone truly understood the person he had become, the choices he had made, and the regrets that lingered. One evening, as they sat together in the conservatory, Elsa turned to him with a question that took him by surprise. "Are you happy, Mr. Leroy?" The question lingered in the air, raw and unguarded. For a moment, Leroy could not find his voice. Happiness was a concept he had not considered in years. He had defined his life by achievements, by wealth, by the respect of others. But happiness? It was an emotion he had deliberately kept at a distance, believing it to be a distraction from his goals. Yet here was Elsa, her small face earnest and expectant, challenging him to confront a truth he had buried. He looked away, his gaze fixed on the delicate petals of a nearby flower. "I don't know, Elsa," he admitted softly. I think I may have forgotten what happiness feels like." Elsa simply nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Maybe it's like the flowers here," she said after a moment. "They're beautiful, but they need sunlight and water to stay that way. Maybe people need things too, like friends to stay happy." Her words, spoken with such simplicity, struck him deeply. In that moment, he realized that he had spent his life building walls around himself, hiding behind his wealth, pushing people away. And yet, this small girl, with her quiet wisdom, was teaching him more about life than he had ever learned from all his success and possessions. As Elsa drifted off to sleep that night, Leroy sat in the quiet of his mansion, reflecting on the strange, unexpected journey she had led him on. For the first time, he felt a glimmer of something he had long thought lost, a sense of hope, a belief that perhaps, just perhaps, there was still time to find meaning beyond his riches. But Leroy's journey of self-discovery isn't without its challenges. As Elsa becomes a part of his life, he must face the complications of his own family, including the struggles of caring for his ailing mother. Stay tuned as we dive into the next chapter, exploring how Elsa's presence brings hope and tension into the Riley household. Leroy's days, once defined by silence and solitude, now began with the soft footsteps of Elsa exploring the mansion, her laughter echoing faintly through the halls, bringing a warmth he hadn't felt in years. Yet, this newfound light in his life only emphasized the shadows that lingered within him, particularly the unresolved challenges in his family. At the heart of these was Rosita, his mother, a woman who had once been lively, strong-willed and formidable, now suffering from the relentless decline of Alzheimer's disease. The diagnosis had taken a toll on them both, forcing Leroy to confront the reality that time could not be bought or controlled. Rosita had been moved to a quiet wing of the mansion years before, and her presence in his life had since faded into a background of caregivers and medical appointments. As her mind slipped further into the fog of her condition, Leroy had distanced himself emotionally, convincing himself that it was better to remember her as she once was than to face the heartache of seeing her in this vulnerable state. But now, with Elsa's innocent presence, that avoidance weighed heavily on him, as if the walls he'd built around his heart were cracking. Elsa had been curious about Rosita from the start, intrigued by the faint, rhythmic hum of music that sometimes drifted from her room, the remnants of a once skilled pianist's habitual playing, now reduced to a few fading memories echoing through her frail fingers. On one particular morning, Elsa had ventured down the hallway, drawn by the music, her small face pressed against Rosita's door as she listened. Leroy found her there, and seeing her innocent curiosity, he felt a pang of shame for having kept the two worlds apart. With a deep breath, he opened the door, ushering Elsa inside. Rosita sat by the window, her gaze distant, her frail hands resting on the keys of an old piano. Her fingers moved absent-mindedly over them, producing faint, disconnected notes. For a moment, she seemed not to notice them, lost in a memory far beyond their reach. But then, as Elsa stepped closer, Rosita's gaze shifted, her cloudy eyes focusing on the little girl before her. Who is this, Leroy?" she asked, her voice frail but carrying a hint of her former strength. "This is Elsa," he replied, carefully choosing his words. "She's staying with us for a while." Rosita looked at Elsa with a soft, confused smile, as if Elsa's youthful presence stirred something familiar within her. Without hesitation, Elsa took Rosita's hand, gently leading her fingers to the piano keys. It was a simple act of connection, but it brought a warmth to Rosita's expression, a hint of recognition that Leroy hadn't seen in years. For the first time, he saw his mother not as the burden he had feared, but as a vulnerable, precious soul reaching out for connection. Days passed, and Elsa continued to visit Rosita, her presence calming the elderly woman, often bringing smiles to her face. The two seemed to share an unspoken bond, a connection that transcended words, rooted in the kindness and innocence that Elsa brought with her. For Leroy, this new relationship between Elsa and his mother was both heartening and challenging. He found himself drawn back to Rosita's room, taking small steps toward a reconciliation with his own past, yet feeling the weight of his previous detachment. In Rosita's better moments, when her mind was momentarily clear, she would speak of her past, recounting tales of her youth that reminded Leroy of his own childhood. She would describe her dreams for him, the love and pride she had felt, and how deeply she had wished for him to find happiness beyond wealth. These conversations, brief as they were, stirred a profound sense of regret within Leroy. He had focused so relentlessly on securing a prosperous life, yet he had overlooked the importance of truly living it. But not everyone in the mansion welcomed Elsa's presence. Marilyn, the longtime housekeeper, had grown increasingly wary of the changes Elsa brought. Loyal and protective of Leroy and Rosita, Marilyn viewed Elsa as a disruption to the household's delicate balance. She worried that Leroy's newfound attachment to the child might lead to complications, and her concern was heightened by her deep sense of duty toward Rosita's care. Marilyn often voiced her concerns, expressing doubts about the impact Elsa's presence might have on Rosita's condition. "Sir, I know you mean well," she would say, her voice respectful yet firm. "But this little girl, she brings a lot of excitement, and with your mother's condition, it might be more than she can handle." Leroy understood her concerns. Marilyn had been more than a housekeeper. She had been a constant presence, almost a second mother to him. Her cautious nature was driven by loyalty, not malice. But for the first time, he felt compelled to follow his heart rather than logic. Elsa had brought a warmth to the mansion, one that seemed to benefit Rosita as much as himself. And so, despite Marilyn's misgivings, he chose to continue allowing Elsa and Rosita to spend time together. The tension in the household grew as Marilyn became increasingly uncomfortable with Elsa's presence. She was not hostile, but her demeanor grew distant, her warmth toward Leroy tempered by her loyalty to the household's routines. Leroy sensed her disapproval, and he knew it came from a place of care. Yet he also knew that Elsa's influence was more healing than disruptive, not only for Rosita, but for himself as well. One evening, Leroy found himself in the kitchen with Marilyn, her eyes weary as she prepared tea. The weight of unspoken words filled the room, and after a moment of silence, she finally voiced her thoughts. "You're changing, Mr. Leroy," she said quietly, her gaze fixed on the teacup in her hands. "I'm not sure if it's for the better or worse, but I see it." Leroy looked at her, recognizing the truth in her words. He was changing in ways that both frightened and exhilarated him. The walls he had built were slowly crumbling, his heart opening to emotions he had long buried. But it was a vulnerable state, one that left him feeling exposed, uncertain, yet somehow alive. He nodded slowly, acknowledging her words, but said nothing more. Later that night, as he sat by Rosita's side, watching Elsa read to her from an old storybook, he felt a profound sense of peace. The worries that had plagued him, the doubts and fears about allowing Elsa into their lives, seemed to fade in the gentle glow of the moment. Elsa's small voice filled the room, bringing Rosita a rare smile, one that lit up her face and softened the lines of age and illness. It was a fleeting moment, yet it held a beauty he hadn't known he was missing. As the days turned into weeks, Leroy's connection to Elsa and Rosita deepened, and the mansion began to feel less like a fortress and more like a home. He spent more time with his mother, listening to her stories, rediscovering fragments of his own past that he had long forgotten. And through Elsa, he found a renewed appreciation for the simple joys of life, the warmth of a shared meal, the comfort of companionship, the gentle rhythm of laughter and love. But even as he embraced this new life, he knew that deeper challenges lay ahead. The journey he had embarked on with Elsa and Rosita was only beginning, and he sensed that it would require him to confront his past, to face the choices he had made and the pain he had hidden away. It was a path of self-discovery and healing, one that held both promise and peril. What happens when loyalty clashes with compassion? As Marilyn's concerns grow, Leroy must navigate the delicate balance of maintaining harmony within his household while embracing the changes Elsa has brought. Stay tuned as we explore the tensions that arise and the choices Leroy must make in the next chapter. As Elsa's presence grew in Leroy's life, her gentle influence began reshaping the mansion's cold, stately halls into something softer, warmer. But while Leroy found himself drawn to the changes Elsa inspired, Marilyn, his longtime housekeeper, saw things differently. She had worked for the Riley family for decades, caring for Leroy and his mother with quiet loyalty and a fierce sense of duty. To Marilyn, the mansion was more than a workplace, it was a sanctuary, a place where every corner, every piece of furniture had a purpose. Elsa's arrival, however, stirred her concern, creating a ripple of tension that was difficult to ignore. Marilyn watched carefully as Leroy began to break from his usual routines. The rigid schedules, the quiet dinners, the silent, lonely nights, all were becoming things of the past. Now Elsa's laughter filled the house, her small footsteps echoed in the corridors, and her questions, though innocent, brought out a side of Leroy that Marilyn had not seen in years. And while she knew her employer was finding joy in the girl's presence, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. Marilyn's concerns weren't rooted in resentment or jealousy. In truth, she cared deeply for Leroy and his mother, Rosita. She had watched as Rosita's illness progressed, feeling each lost memory as a blow to her own heart. She had seen Leroy withdraw from the world, retreating into a fortress built from wealth and solitude, and she had respected his choice, understanding that it was his way of coping. But Elsa's arrival felt like an intrusion into a world that, while lonely, was safe and predictable. One evening, as Marilyn cleared the dishes from the dining room table, she approached Leroy with a hesitant but determined expression. "Sir," she began, her voice low but firm, "may I speak with you?" Leroy looked up from his chair, sensing the seriousness in her tone. He nodded, gesturing for her to sit. She remained standing, her hands clasped tightly in front of her as she gathered her thoughts. "It's about Elsa," she continued, her gaze steady yet softened by concern. "I know she means a lot to you, and I can see she's brought a joy to this house that's been missing for a long time. But I'm worried, sir. Worried about how all of this will affect Rosita, and well, yourself." Leroy listened, a frown creasing his brow. He respected Marilyn deeply, trusting her as much as one could trust someone who had seen their most vulnerable moments. Her loyalty was unquestionable, and he knew her words were not spoken lightly. "What worries you, Marilyn?" he asked, his voice calm but curious. He genuinely wanted to understand her concerns, even if he wasn't entirely sure he agreed with them. She took a breath, choosing her words carefully. "Your mother, she's very delicate, and Elsa brings a lot of energy, a lot of change. Rosita's condition, sometimes even small disruptions, can be confusing or overwhelming for her. And as for you, sir, you've been changing. I've watched you grow closer to Elsa, opening yourself up in ways I didn't expect. But if something were to happen, if she were to leave, I worry about what that would do to you." Her words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken fears. Leroy understood what she meant. The walls he had built over the years, meant to protect him from heartache, were slowly crumbling, allowing feelings of care and attachment to seep in. And with that openness came a vulnerability he hadn't experienced in decades. "Marilyn," he began, his tone thoughtful, "I understand your concern, and I appreciate it more than you know. But Elsa, she's brought something into my life that I didn't realize I needed. Yes, I've grown attached, perhaps more than I should, but it feels right." Marilyn studied him, seeing the sincerity in his expression. It was difficult to argue with the happiness Elsa had brought him, but her instincts urged caution. She nodded slowly, choosing to respect his choice, though her doubts remained. In the days that followed, Marilyn continued her duties with quiet diligence, though her concerns lingered. She watched over Rosita, careful to monitor how the elderly woman responded to Elsa's visits. At first, she remained distant, wary of the impact Elsa might have on Rosita's fragile state. But gradually she noticed small, unexpected changes. Rosita, who had once sat in silence, her gaze lost in distant memories, now smiled when Elsa entered the room. She laughed at Elsa's innocent stories, even hummed along as Elsa played simple melodies on the piano. It was as if Elsa's presence brought pieces of Rosita's old self back to life, moments of clarity that were as beautiful as they were fleeting. Despite these positive signs, Marilyn couldn't shake her concerns. One evening, she found herself alone in the kitchen, her thoughts heavy. Elsa entered quietly, sensing Marilyn's mood, and sat at the counter, swinging her legs as she watched the housekeeper with a curious expression. "Why are you always so serious, Miss Marilyn?" Elsa asked, her voice innocent but probing. Marilyn looked at her, startled by the directness of the question. She hesitated, unsure of how to answer a question that even she struggled to articulate. "Well, child," she replied slowly, "when you've lived as long as I have, seen the things I've seen, you learn to be careful. You learn that not everything in life is certain. It's not easy to let go of that caution." Elsa tilted her head, considering Marilyn's words. "But isn't it nice to be happy, even if just for a little while?" she asked. The simplicity of the question struck Marilyn deeply, and she found herself unable to respond. She saw a wisdom in Elsa's eyes that defied her age, a reminder that sometimes the greatest joys in life come from embracing the uncertain. As the days passed, Marilyn began to soften, her cautious nature tempered by the quiet beauty of the moments Elsa shared with Rosita. She saw how Lyra grew more at ease, how he laughed more freely, and how his once stern demeanor softened when Elsa was near. Though she still worried about the risks of attachment, she couldn't deny the positive changes Elsa had brought to the household. Gradually, her resistance waned, replaced by a tentative acceptance of the girl's presence. One afternoon, Marilyn found herself in Rosita's room, watching as Elsa played a simple tune on the piano, Rosita humming along. She felt a wave of emotion that she couldn't fully explain, a mixture of nostalgia, hope, and perhaps even gratitude. For years, she had devoted herself to maintaining order, believing that routine and caution were the keys to stability. But Elsa's presence was teaching her something new, that life, with all its uncertainties, could be beautiful in its unpredictability. After that day, Marilyn's attitude toward Elsa softened. She became more welcoming, even offering to bake Elsa's favorite treats and sharing stories of her own past. Stories she hadn't spoken of in years. The mansion, once a place of quiet routines, began to feel like a home once more, filled with laughter, warmth, and the gentle rhythm of lives intertwined. For Leroy, seeing Marilyn embrace Elsa marked a turning point. The household, once bound by rules and caution, was now a place of acceptance and growth. He felt a newfound sense of peace, a feeling that perhaps, after all these years, he was finally building something meaningful. As time passes, Leroy begins to realize that his bond with Elsa is growing stronger, leading him to consider a life-altering decision that would change both their lives forever. Join us for the next chapter, where Leroy contemplates the possibility of becoming Elsa's guardian, and the unexpected journey of love and responsibility that follows. As the days turned into weeks, Leroy began to recognize a profound change within himself, one that was both comforting and unsettling. Elsa's presence had gently woven itself into the fabric of his daily life, filling the once empty mansion with laughter and warmth. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of connection that extended beyond the cold formality of his wealth, beyond the rituals and routines he had built around himself to stave off loneliness. In Elsa, he found not just companionship, but a bridge to parts of himself he had long forgotten. Elsa, on her part, seemed to flourish in her new surroundings. Though she came from a background of simple means, she adapted quickly to life in Leroy's grand estate. embracing the luxuries around her with the wonder and joy of a child. But it wasn't the material wealth that captured her heart. Rather, it was the kindness and warmth she found in Leroy's growing affection. Each day, she brought a lightness to his world, teaching him that happiness didn't come from possessions or power, but from the simple, unguarded moments they shared. One quiet afternoon, Leroy found himself in the conservatory with Elsa, where she was tending to the flowers under his careful guidance. Her small hands patted down the soil around a delicate orchid, her brow furrowed in concentration as she took great care with each motion. He watched her, marveling at the innocence and tenderness she brought to each small task. And a thought he had pushed aside for weeks finally surfaced. Perhaps he could offer her more than just a temporary refuge. The idea was daunting, yet it lingered in his mind, growing stronger with each passing day. Could he, after all these years, become a true guardian to this child? Could he fill the role of protector, mentor, even father? The thought frightened him, for he was a man who had lived his life on his own terms, unbound by the responsibilities and sacrifices that came with caring for others. But when he looked at Elsa's small, determined face, he felt an unexpected surge of courage, a willingness to consider a future that was not defined by his isolation. That evening, as they sat by the fire, Elsa turned to him with a question that caught him off guard. "Mr. Leroy, do you ever feel lonely?" Her question was asked with the directness that only a child could manage, her eyes searching his with an innocence that held no judgment. He paused, considering his response. In truth, loneliness had been his constant companion for years, a silent shadow that filled the spaces between his wealth and his heart. Yet, how could he explain that to a child? How could he convey the ache that had settled into his bones, the emptiness he had tried to ignore? "Yes, Elsa," he replied softly, his voice barely more than a whisper. "I have been lonely for a very long time." She seemed to understand, her small hand reaching out to take his, her grip warm and reassuring. "But you're not lonely now, are you?" she asked, her voice filled with quiet confidence. A smile touched his lips, a rare, genuine expression that softened his face. "No, I suppose I'm not," he admitted, feeling a sense of peace settle over him. Elsa had become more than just a guest in his home. She was a balm for his heart, a reminder of the love and connection he had denied himself for so long. In the days that followed, Leroy found himself growing more comfortable with the idea of taking on a greater role in Elsa's life. He began to envision what it would mean to offer her a permanent home, a place where she could grow, learn, and thrive under his guidance. The decision was not one he took lightly, for he understood the weight of the commitment he was considering. But as he watched Elsa move through his home, filling each room with laughter and light, he knew that he could not imagine a future without her by his side. One afternoon, while Elsa was reading in the library, Leroy sat in his study. Surrounded by papers and legal documents, he began to research the process of adoption, familiarizing himself with the steps he would need to take to make Elsa a permanent part of his life. The idea felt surreal, even intimidating, but for the first time in years, he felt a sense of purpose that went beyond his own desires and ambitions. He was not just building a future for himself, but for Elsa as well, and the thought filled him with a quiet, profound joy. Elsa sensed the change in him, though he had not yet spoken of his plans. She noticed the way he watched her with a newfound intensity, as though he were memorizing every detail of her face, every expression that flitted across her features. She felt the warmth of his affection, the gentle protectiveness that colored his every interaction with her, and it brought her a sense of security she had never known before. In Leroy, she had found a home not in the mansion, but in the man himself, in his quiet strength and steady presence. One evening, as they sat together by the fire, Leroy decided to broach the subject with her. He was nervous, uncertain of how to phrase his intentions in a way that would not overwhelm or frighten her. After a moment's hesitation, he cleared his throat, his voice steady but soft. "Elsa," he began, his tone gentle, "I wanted to ask you something important. How would you feel if you stayed here? Not just for a little while, but forever?" She looked at him, her eyes wide with surprise and a hint of wonder. "You mean, Like a family? She asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. Leroy nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. Yes, like a family. I would like to be there for you, to take care of you, if you would want that. For a moment, she was silent, her expression thoughtful. Then, slowly, a smile spread across her face, a smile that lit up her eyes and filled him with a sense of peace he had never known. I would like that very much, she replied, her voice filled with quiet happiness. From that moment on, Leroy's decision was set. He began the process of formalizing his commitment to Elsa, working with lawyers and officials to ensure that she would have a permanent place in his life. The journey was not without its challenges, for there were questions to answer, legal hurdles to overcome, and many moments of uncertainty. But through it all, he remained steadfast, driven by a love that he had never known he was capable of feeling. Their bond grew stronger with each passing day, a connection that transcended age, wealth, and background. Leroy found himself learning as much from Elsa as she did from him. Each moment spent together a lesson in patience, kindness, and the simple beauty of shared companionship. He discovered a depth of compassion within himself, a willingness to open his heart fully, without reservation or fear. For Elsa, the mansion became more than just a place to live. It became a true home, a sanctuary filled with love, laughter, and the gentle rhythm of daily life. She thrived under Leroy's care, her days filled with learning, exploration, and the joy of knowing she was truly loved. Together, they created a life built on trust, respect, and mutual affection, a bond that would shape them both in ways they could never have imagined. As Leroy watched Elsa grow, he felt a sense of fulfillment that went beyond anything he had achieved in his career or amassed in his wealth. He had found a purpose greater than himself, a reason to wake each morning with a heart full of gratitude and hope. In Elsa, he had discovered the family he had never thought he would have, a love that defied the limitations of his past and opened his heart to a future filled with promise. What happens when Elsa discovers Rosita's old piano and plays a tune that awakens memories in Leroy's mother? Join us as we explore the powerful bond that music brings, reconnecting generations and bringing healing to old wounds. One quiet afternoon, as Elsa wandered through the grand rooms of the mansion, she found herself drawn to a small, unassuming room at the end of a corridor. The door was slightly ajar, and as she pushed it open, her eyes fell upon an elegant old piano tucked into the corner. Dust coated the surface, and the keys were slightly worn from years of playing, a testament to a past filled with melodies and memories. Curious, Elsa approached the instrument, her fingers hovering over the keys. She pressed one gently, and the note rang out, soft and clear. She smiled, pressing another key, then another, forming a tentative melody. The sound filled the room, delicate and haunting, carrying a sense of nostalgia that Elsa couldn't quite understand but felt deeply. Her young fingers moved carefully, producing a simple childlike tune, and as she played, something remarkable happened. The door behind her creaked open, and Rosita appeared, drawn to the familiar sound of the piano. Rosita's eyes, clouded by age and memory loss, brightened at the sound. She had once been an accomplished pianist, filling her home with music that told stories and stirred emotions. Though she hadn't played in years, the music Elsa produced reached her in a way words couldn't, evoking memories of her past, moments of joy and youth. Slowly she approached Elsa, her movements hesitant but deliberate, as if she were walking through a dream. Elsa looked up, sensing Rosita's presence. She stopped playing, a little uncertain, but Rosita gave her a gentle smile, a look of warmth and recognition that transcended the gaps in her memory. "Please, don't stop, my dear," Rosita whispered, her voice barely more than a breath. Encouraged, Elsa continued playing, her small hands exploring simple melodies. Rosita watched, captivated, as if each note brought her closer to a version of herself she thought she had lost forever. After a few moments, Rosita sat beside Elsa on the piano bench, her fingers reaching out instinctively to the keys. Elsa moved aside slightly, giving Rosita space, and together they played, one leading, the other following in a harmonious duet. "Leroy," hearing the music from down the hall, was drawn to the room. As he entered, he found himself rooted to the spot, watching his mother and Elsa playing together, their expressions calm and serene. It was a sight he had never imagined witnessing. Rosita, who had been so lost in her illness, now seemed almost herself again, her fingers dancing over the keys with a grace that only years of practice could produce. And Elsa, with her innocence and simplicity, was the perfect companion, matching Rosita's notes with a childlike joy. For Leroy, this moment was nothing short of a miracle. He felt a surge of gratitude, not just for Elsa's presence, but for the way she had breathed life back into his mother, even if only temporarily. The music created a bond between them, one that reached across generations, bringing healing and connection in a way words never could. As he stood there, his heart swelled with emotions he had long suppressed: love, pride, and a deep sense of fulfillment. After they finished playing, Rosita turned to Elsa, her eyes bright and filled with a clarity that was rare for her these days. "You have a gift, child," she said, her voice warm and sincere. "Music, it has a way of connecting us, even when words fail." Elsa beamed, taking Rosita's hand gently. "You played beautifully, Mrs. Rosita," she said, her voice full of admiration. "Will you teach me more?" Rosita nodded, and for the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of purpose. Teaching Elsa brought back memories of the years she had spent playing music, of the joy it had once brought her. With Elsa as her eager student, Rosita rediscovered a part of herself that had been buried beneath the weight of illness and age. Their piano sessions became a daily ritual, a sacred time when they could escape the limitations of the present and lose themselves in the music. As the weeks went by, Leroy often found himself listening from the hallway, savoring the sound of their laughter, the warmth of their connection. He was amazed at how music had transformed not just Rosita, but his entire home, filling it with life and energy. It was as though the melodies they created had woven themselves into the very walls, lifting the spirits of everyone within. The bond that formed between Rosita and Elsa became a source of strength for them both. Rosita, despite her memory lapses, began to remember pieces of her past, small fragments of her youth, of her days as a performer, and of the family gatherings where she would play for her loved ones. She shared these memories with Elsa, who listened intently, fascinated by the stories of a life so different from her own. For Elsa, these lessons were more than just music. They were a window into a world she had never known, a world of elegance and tradition that Rosita embodied. Through Rosita's stories and teachings, Elsa developed a newfound appreciation for the past, for the history and legacy that Rosita represented. She learned not only to play the piano, but to understand the depth of emotion that music could convey, the way it could tell stories without words, bridging gaps that seemed insurmountable. One day, after a particularly moving piece, Rosita looked at Elsa with a gentle smile, her hand resting on the girl's shoulder. "Elsa," she said softly, "music has given me many gifts. It brought me joy, strength, and comfort in times of sorrow, and now it's given me you." Elsa's eyes sparkled with tears, and she hugged Rosita, her small arms wrapped tightly around the older woman. In that moment, their bond was unbreakable, a testament to the healing power of connection and the beauty of shared experiences. Rosita, once lost in the fog of illness, now found a sense of clarity and purpose through Elsa, and Elsa, in turn, discovered a world of wisdom and love that she could carry with her into the future. Leroy, watching from the doorway, felt a profound sense of peace. He knew that the bond between Elsa and Rosita was something rare, a blessing that had brought new life to both of them. It was a reminder that no matter how much time had passed or how much pain they had endured, love and compassion could heal even the deepest wounds. As he stepped back, giving them their moment, he felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for the journey they were on together. Elsa had touched his life in ways he had never expected, and in doing so, she had brought him closer to his mother, helping him rediscover the joy and beauty that had been buried beneath years of isolation and self-protection. But the path to healing is rarely straightforward. In the next chapter, Leroy must confront the painful memories and past mistakes that have shaped his life, learning that forgiveness and redemption are keys to moving forward. Join us as we delve deeper into Leroy's journey of self-discovery, where the past meets the present and old wounds begin to heal. As life in the mansion continued to bloom with newfound warmth and connection, Leroy found himself feeling an unsettling yet familiar tension growing within. Elsa's presence had softened his world, creating bonds of love and companionship he hadn't known were possible. But with each precious moment he shared with her and his mother, a haunting feeling crept in, memories of a past he had long buried, choices he had made that left wounds not easily healed. One night, as Elsa and Rosita slept, Leroy wandered into his study, feeling the weight of his thoughts. The room was lined with leather-bound books, awards, and tokens of success achievements that symbolized years of striving, of sacrifices, of an unwavering pursuit of wealth and security. Yet, looking at them now, he felt a hollowness, a sense that these accomplishments were not the legacy he wanted to leave behind. Instead, they reminded him of the relationships he had neglected, the people he had left behind in his single-minded pursuit of success. Leroy's thoughts drifted to his younger self, a man driven by a deep-seated fear of poverty and insignificance. He had grown up in modest surroundings, watching his parents struggle, feeling the weight of every dollar spent. From an early age, he had vowed that he would never endure that kind of hardship again, that he would rise above it, no matter the cost. And so he had climbed, step by step, sacrificing friendships, distancing himself from loved ones, and shutting out anyone who questioned his path. But now, with Elsa in his life, he saw the futility of those sacrifices. She had taught him the value of presence, of love, of giving without expecting anything in return. And as he looked back over the choices that had led him to this point, he realized that many of them had been made out of fear of vulnerability, fear of losing control, fear of not being enough. Unable to shake these thoughts, Leroy opened a drawer in his desk and pulled out an old photograph, a faded picture of himself and a woman with a warm smile, her hand resting gently on his shoulder. Her name was Anna, and she had been the love of his life. They had met in their 20s, sharing dreams and laughter, talking of a future built on love rather than wealth. But as Leroy's ambitions grew, his relationship with Anna began to falter. She had wanted a life filled with simple joys, with family and community, while he was consumed by a desire to achieve, to conquer. In the end, they had parted ways, her heart broken yet supportive, urging him to find happiness in whatever way he saw fit. Leroy had convinced himself that it was for the best, that love was a distraction he could not afford. But now, years later, he realized that losing Anna had been one of his greatest mistakes, a choice made not out of necessity, but out of a fear he had refused to confront. As the memories flooded back, Leroy felt a pang of regret so strong it brought tears to his eyes. He had built walls around his heart, convincing himself that love and connection were luxuries he could not afford. But now, in the quiet of his study, with Elsa's laughter still echoing faintly in his mind, he knew that those walls had kept him from the very things that gave life meaning. In the days that followed, Leroy struggled to reconcile these revelations with the man he had become. He spent more time with Elsa, savoring each moment, each smile, each shared laugh. But the weight of his past continued to haunt him, and he knew that in order to truly embrace this new life, he had to make peace with the choices that had brought him here. Driven by a need for closure, Leroy made a decision. He reached out to Anna, writing her a letter that expressed the regrets he had carried for so long. In it, he apologized for the pain he had caused, for the love he had taken for granted, and for the years he had spent believing that success was more valuable than connection. He told her about Elsa, about how this small girl had reminded him of the importance of love, and how she had taught him that true wealth was found not in possessions, but in relationships. He sent the letter with no expectation of a reply, knowing that Anna had moved on, that her life had taken a different path. But in writing those words, he felt a sense of release, a lightness that he hadn't known in years. He had taken a step toward healing, toward forgiving himself for the mistakes of his past. One evening, As Leroy sat by the fire with Elsa, she sensed the change in him. "You look different, Mr. Leroy," she observed, her young eyes filled with curiosity. "Like you put something heavy down." He smiled, reaching out to ruffle her hair. "I think I have, Elsa," he replied softly. "Sometimes we carry things we don't need, things that weigh us down. And when we finally let them go, we can see life a little more clearly." Elsa nodded, her gaze thoughtful. "Did you let go of something sad?" Leroy paused, then nodded. "Yes, I did. And because of you, I'm learning to fill that space with something better, something happy." In that moment, he realized that Elsa had not only touched his heart, she had given him a second chance, a chance to rewrite his story, to create a legacy of love rather than regret. He felt a profound sense of gratitude for the journey they were on together, for the way she had shown him the power of connection, of forgiveness, and of healing. As he watched Elsa drift off to sleep, her small face peaceful and content, he knew that he was no longer bound by the shadows of his past. He had faced his regrets, acknowledged his mistakes, and opened his heart to a future filled with hope and love. As Leroy embraces this second chance, he makes a life-changing decision to officially become Elsa's guardian, taking steps to provide her with a permanent, loving home. In the next chapter, join us as we witness this emotional journey of adoption, a symbol of renewal for both Leroy and Elsa. With each day that passed, the bond between Leroy and Elsa grew deeper, rooted not just in companionship, but in a love that felt like family. Leroy had gone from being a solitary figure, hidden behind the walls of his mansion, to someone who could laugh and love freely. Elsa's presence had transformed him, and he knew it. The decision to become her official guardian began to form in his mind. Slowly at first, like a small seed of hope, until it blossomed into an undeniable resolve. Leroy spent hours contemplating this choice, understanding the weight it carried. Adopting Elsa would mean more than just offering her a place to live. It would mean providing her with the stability, guidance, and love that every child deserved. It would mean accepting the responsibility of shaping her future and dedicating himself to her well-being. And yet, he knew in his heart that he wanted nothing more. Elsa had given him a gift he could never repay, a second chance to be the man he was always meant to be. One afternoon, as they walked together in the garden, Leroy decided to share his thoughts with Elsa. They strolled among the flowers, the sunlight casting a gentle glow over them, and he cleared his throat, feeling a mix of nervousness and excitement. "Elsa," he began, his voice soft but steady, "I have something important to ask you." She looked up at him, her eyes wide and curious. "What is it, Mr. Leroy?" He took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "How would you feel if you became a permanent part of my family? If you stayed here with me, not just for now, but forever?" For a moment, Elsa was silent, her expression thoughtful. Then, a smile broke across her face, radiant and joyful, and she threw her arms around him in a hug. "I would love that," she exclaimed, her voice filled with happiness. "I don't ever want to leave." Leroy felt a wave of relief and joy wash over him as he hugged her back, feeling her small arms around his neck. In that moment, he knew that this decision was right, that their lives were meant to be intertwined. She had become a part of him, filling the spaces in his heart that he hadn't realized were empty. With Elsa's enthusiastic agreement, Leroy began the formal process of adoption. The journey was filled with paperwork, meetings, and interviews, each step a reminder of the commitment he was making. Though it was a complex and, at times, overwhelming process, he was undeterred, determined to make Elsa his daughter in every sense of the word. The thought of providing her with a permanent home, a place of love and safety, fueled his resolve. As they navigated this journey together, Leroy found himself sharing more of his life with Elsa, opening up about his past, his hopes, and his dreams for their future. He spoke of his mistakes, the regrets that had haunted him, and the lessons he had learned. In return, Elsa shared her own experiences, her fears, and her dreams, her innocent perspective reminding him of the importance of living with an open heart. One evening, after a particularly long day of meetings and paperwork, Leroy sat with Elsa by the fire, feeling a deep sense of contentment. "Soon, it will be official," he said, smiling at her. "You'll be my daughter, and we'll be a family." Elsa's eyes sparkled with joy. "Does that mean I get to stay here forever?" she asked, her voice filled with hope. "Yes, Elsa," he replied, his voice warm and gentle. "Forever." In the weeks leading up to the finalization of the adoption, the mansion underwent a transformation. Rooms that had once been silent and empty now echoed with laughter and joy. Elsa decorated her bedroom with colors and drawings, filling the space with her personality and dreams. Leroy even found himself redecorating other rooms, making the mansion feel less like a cold monument to his wealth and more like a true home. One evening, as they were arranging furniture in Elsa's room, she paused, looking around with a contented smile. "I never thought I'd have a room like this," she said softly. "It's like a dream come true." Leroy knelt down beside her, his expression serious yet filled with love. "Elsa, you deserve this and so much more. You've brought so much light into my life, more than I can ever repay." She looked up at him, her small hand reaching out to take his. "I don't need you to repay me, Mr. Leroy. I just need you to be here." Her words touched him deeply, filling his heart with gratitude. Elsa had taught him that love was not a transaction, not something measured in dollars or possessions. It was a gift, freely given and freely received, a bond that transcended any material wealth. She had brought him back to life, reminding him of the beauty of connection, of the power of family. On the day the adoption was finalized, Leroy felt a profound sense of fulfillment. He signed the papers with a steady hand, his heart filled with joy as he officially became Elsa's father. The legal process was complete, but for him, it was far more than a formality. It was a renewal, a rebirth, a chance to rewrite his story and create a legacy of love. As they left the courthouse, Elsa's hand firmly in his, Leroy felt as though he were seeing the world anew. The sunlight seemed brighter, the air fresher, every detail of life more vibrant and meaningful. For the first time, he felt truly complete, as though all the years of isolation and striving had led him to this moment, to the family he had longed for without even knowing it. That evening, they celebrated together in the mansion, a quiet yet joyful celebration of their new life. They shared a simple meal, laughing and talking as they reflected on the journey that had brought them together. Rosita joined them, her heart full of pride and joy as she welcomed Elsa into their family. For her, this union was a blessing, a chance to see her son find happiness, to witness the love and joy that Elsa had brought into their lives. As they sat together, Elsa looked around, her face glowing with happiness. "I've always wanted a family like this," she said softly, her eyes filled with gratitude. Leroy took her hand, his voice filled with emotion. "And I've always wanted a daughter like you." In that moment, they both understood the depth of their bond, a connection that went beyond words, beyond the circumstances that had brought them together. They were a family bound by love, by shared experiences, and by a commitment to one another's happiness. It was a bond that would last a lifetime, a promise of belonging that neither of them had ever known before. As Leroy looked at Elsa, he felt a profound sense of peace, knowing that he had been given a second chance, a chance to live not just for himself, but for the people he loved. He had found a purpose greater than any ambition, a reason to wake each day with joy and gratitude. And in Elsa's smile, he saw the future he had once feared was lost, a future filled with love, laughter, and the beauty of a life lived in connection. In the next chapter, we'll witness how Elsa's presence continues to transform the mansion, filling it with light, warmth, and hope, as Leroy's once lonely home becomes a place of true belonging. Join us as we see how love and family bring new life to the Riley estate, and the joy of creating memories that will last a lifetime. The transformation of Leroy's mansion began subtly, with small changes that seemed almost incidental. But as days turned into weeks, it became clear that Elsa's presence had ushered in a new spirit, breathing life into the spaces that had once felt cold and distant. The mansion, once an imposing symbol of wealth and isolation, was becoming a true home, one where laughter and love replaced silence and solitude. Each room in the house reflected this change. In the kitchen, Elsa's colorful drawings began to appear on the walls and refrigerator scenes of her and Leroy, of Rosita and the garden, of their favorite moments together. The library, a place that had once been merely a showpiece for Leroy's collection of books, now served as a haven where Elsa and Leroy spent evenings reading together, their voices mingling as they explored the pages of classic tales. For the first time in years, Leroy found himself reading not to escape or distract himself, but to connect, to share, to see the world through Elsa's eyes. The hallways, once empty and echoing, now displayed Elsa's laughter as she dashed through them, playing hide and seek with Leroy or Rosita. Her footsteps brought warmth to every corner, filling the mansion with a sense of vitality and joy. Her energy seemed boundless, and each day, she found new ways to bring beauty and light to the old house. In the garden, Elsa's touch was equally evident. She had a natural affinity for plants and flowers, and Leroy, seeing her enthusiasm, had hired a gardener to help her create her own little space within the grounds. Together, Elsa and the gardener planted colorful flowers, building a vibrant oasis that contrasted with the mansion's formal landscaping. The garden became a place of laughter and creativity, and Leroy found himself joining Elsa there more and more, his hands in the soil, helping her plant seeds and watching as they sprouted into life. The act of nurturing something together, of tending to the earth and seeing it respond, brought him a sense of peace and fulfillment he hadn't expected. Rosita, too, was drawn to this new energy. Her bond with Elsa grew with each passing day, and she seemed to gain a renewed sense of clarity and purpose. Often, she would sit by the window, watching Elsa in the garden, her face softening as she observed the girls' enthusiasm and joy. At times, Rosita would even join them, her hands working the soil with a grace that reflected her years of experience. She shared stories of her youth, of how she had tended her own garden in her younger days, each memory a bridge connecting her past to the present, linking generations through shared moments. In the evenings, the mansion came alive with the sound of music, a ritual that had become sacred to their little family. Elsa's piano lessons with Rosita had progressed, and each session was filled with laughter, small victories, and the occasional off-key note that only added to the charm. Leroy would sit nearby, watching as Elsa and Rosita played, their music filling the room with warmth and nostalgia. The melodies they created became the soundtrack of their lives together, a gentle reminder of the love and healing that had brought them to this place. One evening, as they played a familiar tune, Elsa looked up at Leroy with a smile. "Why don't you play with us, Mr. Leroy?" she asked, her voice full of encouragement. He laughed, shaking his head. "I'm afraid I'm not as talented as you two," he replied, though her request stirred something within him. "Come on, just try," Elsa urged, patting the bench beside her. Reluctantly, Leroy joined them, his fingers tentatively pressing the keys as Rosita guided him. The music was clumsy at first, his notes unsure, but Elsa's laughter and encouragement filled him with a confidence he hadn't known in years. By the end of the song, they were all laughing, their voices mingling with the music in a moment of pure, unguarded joy. As their lives continued to intertwine, Leroy felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. He had spent years believing that wealth and success were the only things that mattered, that they would provide him with the security and fulfillment he craved. But now, surrounded by his small yet precious family, he saw the true value of life. It was found not in material possessions, but in moments of connection, in the laughter that echoed through the halls, in the warmth of shared experiences. The mansion, once a testament to his achievements, had become a place of memories, a canvas for the life he was building with Elsa and Rosita. Each day, they added new layers to this home, a family dinner here, a shared joke there, a bedtime story that lingered in Elsa's dreams. The walls themselves seemed to absorb their love, transforming from cold stone into something warm and alive. One afternoon, as they sat in the garden, Leroy looked around, feeling a sense of peace that was almost foreign to him. The sun cast a gentle glow over the flowers, the trees rustled in the breeze, and Elsa's laughter mingled with the sounds of nature. He took a deep breath, feeling the beauty of the moment settle within him, and he knew, without a doubt, that this was where he belonged. Rosita, watching him from across the garden, seemed to sense his thoughts. She approached him, her expression soft. "You've created something beautiful here, Leroy," she said, her voice filled with pride. "You've given Elsa a home, a place where she can feel safe and loved. And in doing so, you've given that gift to yourself." Her words resonated deeply within him. He had spent so many years in pursuit of something he could never quite define, and now, here it was, a life filled with love, with meaning, with connection. He looked at Elsa, who was chasing a butterfly through the garden, her laughter filling the air, and he knew that she was the reason he had found this peace. As night fell, they gathered in the living room, the glow of the fire casting a warm light over them. Elsa sat curled up beside Leroy, her head resting on his shoulder, while Rosita sat nearby, her eyes bright with contentment. They shared stories, memories, and dreams, each word a thread that wove them closer together, creating a tapestry of love and belonging. Leroy knew that this was the life he had been searching for, the life he had almost lost in his pursuit of wealth and success. In Elsa's eyes, he saw his own redemption, a chance to create a legacy built not on material achievements, but on love, kindness, and compassion. The mansion, once a symbol of his isolation, had become a place of healing, a sanctuary for all of them, a place where hope could flourish and where dreams could take root. And as he held Elsa close, he knew that the future was bright, filled with the promise of new memories, new adventures, and a love that would endure. In the final chapter, we'll take a step back to reflect on the powerful journey of transformation, love, and second chances that Leroy and Elsa have shared. Join us as we explore the timeless lessons of compassion, kindness, and the beauty of human connection, leaving you with a message that will inspire your own path forward. As the days grew into seasons, Leroy found himself often reflecting on the incredible journey that had brought him to this place. The life he shared with Elsa and Rosita had blossomed into something he could never have predicted, a tapestry woven from moments of laughter, love, and quiet understanding. It was a far cry from the cold, lonely existence he had once accepted as his fate. Now every corner of his home, every room in the mansion, held memories that warmed his heart and filled him with a sense of purpose. On quiet afternoons, as Elsa played in the garden and Rosita sat by the window with a serene smile, Leroy would sit back and think about the powerful lessons he had learned through this journey. He had spent much of his life believing that success was measured by wealth, that the value of a person could be calculated by their achievements. But through Elsa's innocence, Rosita's wisdom, and the simple beauty of a life shared, he had discovered a truth that went beyond material success. True wealth, he realized, was found in the bonds we form, the kindness we show, and the love we give. It was about the moments when we put others before ourselves, when we open our hearts to the people around us, when we dare to be vulnerable. Elsa's presence had opened a door within him, revealing a part of himself he had long buried, a part that valued love, compassion, and the joy of connection over anything money could buy. One evening, as they sat together by the fire, Elsa looked up at him with a thoughtful expression. "Mr. Leroy," she asked, "do you think we'll always be this happy?" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Happiness, my dear Elsa, is like a garden. It takes care, attention, and love to grow. But if we nurture it, if we keep it safe, I believe we can always find joy, even in difficult times." She nodded, her small face serious. "Then let's keep taking care of our happiness," she replied, her words filled with a wisdom beyond her years. Her simple, heartfelt statement brought tears to Leroy's eyes. She had taught him so much, this small, resilient girl who had wandered into his life and changed it forever. In that moment, he understood that she was not only his daughter, but his greatest teacher, a living reminder of the power of kindness and love. She had shown him that life's greatest gifts were often hidden in the most unexpected places, waiting to be discovered by those who dared to look beyond themselves. Rosita, too, had found a new sense of peace through this journey. The bond she shared with Elsa brought her clarity and strength, helping her reclaim pieces of herself that she had thought lost forever. She had witnessed Leroy's transformation, seen the love he had come to embrace, and she felt a quiet pride in the man he had become. For her, this new family was a blessing, a testament to the beauty of second chances and the healing power of connection. In the months that followed, Leroy took every opportunity to spread the lessons he had learned. He became involved in the community, donating his resources to causes that help children in need, supporting programs that encouraged kindness and compassion. He spoke openly about the importance of love, about the value of giving without expecting anything in return. And as he shared his story with others, he found a new purpose, a calling that went beyond the walls of his mansion. Through Elsa's influence, he had become a man who valued humanity above all else. He found joy in simple acts of kindness, in sharing his resources with those who needed it most, in using his wealth not as a fortress, but as a bridge to connect with others. And as he continued on this path, he realized that he had become a part of something greater, a legacy of compassion that would live on long after him. In the end, Leroy's journey was one of redemption, of discovering that the true measure of a life well lived is found not in riches or possessions, but in the love we share and the lives we touch. Elsa had shown him that life's most profound rewards are often those we give away, that in helping others we find our truest selves. And as he looked toward the future, he felt a sense of peace, knowing that he had finally found his purpose. With this story, we hope you take away a message of love, compassion, and the beauty of human connection. Let this story remind you of the power of second chances, and that it's never too late to open your heart to the world around you. If this journey resonated with you, consider sharing your thoughts in the comments below. Perhaps leave an inspiring note like, "I welcome love and kindness into my life," as a way to spread positivity and hope. And if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe for more stories that touch the heart and remind us of what truly matters in life. Together, let's build a community that celebrates empathy, connection, and the joy of being human.